Hi everybody, thanks for looking in again. This is a quick build of Airfix's new tool Westland Lysander in 1/48 scale. Kit was just released in the UK third week in January 2025, and I saw the kit built up on the Airfix stand back in November at Scale Model World at Telford. Looks a really nice kit there on the Airfix stand and in the box. So we're probably going to be building this over, I'm estimating 3 episodes. And in this first episode I want to be covering the first 20 or so construction steps where we're going to build up what looks like quite a detailed cockpit assembly, or interior generally. So it goes over 26 steps. Airfix's new instructions I really like. They're really clear, they don't involve too many parts per step, and the previous assembly is shown in red so you know exactly where you are at every step. So it's a big advance I think from Airfix over the last 3 or 4 years. I think it's been that they've introduced these instructions. Anyway, let's crack on. We'll get the parts out that we need for the first few steps of the construction, starting with what looks like the fuel tank, and we'll get that put together. Now by the time you see this, there'll be masses of reviews of the kit, inbox reviews, but I'm not going to bother doing that. We'll just get straight on and build it. Now the kit feels at first glance a bit like the Gannet that I built last year, the pair of Gannets that I built last year. Very hard plastic, but it's a type of plastic, being hard, that holds detail really well. It's absolutely smooth, there's no graininess to it at all, very polished. So that's good news for us. The Gannet went together really well. Really nice detail on that, and this looks to be continuing that sort of trend from Airfix. I think quite a few people have been a bit disappointed by the Airfix range announcement for 2025. And I suppose the one thing that I will be looking forward to is the Jaguar that was announced. Speaking to the Airfix rep at Bolton at the weekend, the Bolton Model Show, he reckoned that the Jaguar was probably due for release in March, April time. So we might have to just squeeze a little slot in the schedule to have a go at that one when it comes out. This is Mr. Surfacer 500. I'm just going to use that to close up just a hairline gap on the tank. One thing about this plastic, this harder plastic that Airfix use, is that it's also a little bit brittle, especially on a delicate frame part like this, so just be careful when you're cleaning them up. What I was slightly surprised about when I read through the instructions for the kit is how far back the detailing goes. So the rear crew member's position is about here, pilot sits right at the front, but all this detail is pretty well hidden. So I don't think I'll be going to town on this rear fuselage. There are a couple of windows at the back near the fin, but I can't imagine that you can see too much through there. One thing that I have learned from recent Airfix kits is how close the fit tolerance is on them. So it's a good idea to make sure that the parts are properly cleaned up. Remove all the sprue gates, otherwise they can interfere with the fit. Just makes life a bit harder for you later on in the build. I'm just easing the hole on the underside of this seat. There's just a bit of a tight fit and trying to force it on to the delicate frame like this, you stood a good chance of breaking it. So just opening the hole up helps it fit on a little bit easier. Lots of ejector pins on these side frames. Just need to be careful with this bar part here which goes down below the pilot's feet. It's C2. It's got a little key on it just to give you the correct angle to fit that. So just make sure that that goes in the right way around. Another feature of Airfix kits recently are these, what I assume are ejector pins on some of the parts, and occasionally in the instructions Airfix call out with these little green highlights here to tell you to cut them off. Now some of those will be important, some less so. I always remove them anyway. Now the pins that Airfix point out sometimes interfere with the fit. That's possibly the reason why they do it. Sometimes it's just an aesthetic thing that you can see them on the final assembly. Either way, it doesn't take much to just cut them and scrape them off. There's actually another one there that Airfix don't point out. That's the interior framework, which is very detailed, as you can see. And I'm thinking about painting this. It's quite a lot of detail to get in and out of with the airbrush. So what I've decided to do is leave this side off and also the top. Leave that loose, and that'll just be easier to get the airbrush in and around, and also do a little bit of dry brushing on the assembly as well. So those parts are ready for some primer and the first coats of paint, but to save a bit of time I want to prepare all the other cockpit parts. Just mount them up and I'll prime them and paint them at the same time as the rest of the framework. Now you might notice here that if you're building the kit, I've separated the rudder pedals from the rudder bar. This was all moulded as one, but I just couldn't get it to fit when I was test fitting it into the framework, and that's just enabled me to file away some plastic on the underneath to enable it to fit on the bar that goes across the framework. So if you're struggling to fit this in its original form, you might want to consider splitting them up like this, and it's just easier to get together. So all these parts can now go over to the spray booth for some primer, and then once that's dry we can mix some of the interior green up. We'll talk a little bit about the mixture for that when we get to it. In the meantime, I'll get this primed up. Okay, with the primer dry, I want to put a top coat on this. Mr. Surfacer dries pretty quickly. I use about 50% lacquer thinners with it. It goes through the airbrush really easily at that sort of ratio and gives a really nice smooth finish ready for the top coats. Now for the RAF interior green, a lot of people use, and Tamiya recommend for RAF subjects, XF71, which is described as cockpit green. I don't use it straight from the bottle. It's a little bit too green for me, so I like to add some grey to it. This is XF19 Sky Grey. It just tones it down a little bit, and I just think it's a better match for RAF interior green. I think actually that Tamiya XF71 is closer to a Japanese interior green rather than an RAF one, which I think, as I said, needs a little bit of grey in it. So I'll mix that up. I'll just do it by eye until I've got the shade that I want. Okay, so that's the I've mixed a whole bottle of interior green, and I suppose in the end I used about 20% XF19, the grey, and that lightens it and just alters the tone a little bit. So most of the parts here are overall in this colour, so we'll load the airbrush up and I'll get these painted. That interior green's dried nicely now, so I just want to do a little bit of dry brushing before the detail painting. And what I like to use on interior green is this, which is XF14 Japanese Army Grey. You can see that tonally it's a similar colour, but quite a bit lighter. So I'll use some of this to dry brush and then possibly add a little bit of white depending on the effect that I get, just to lighten it a little bit more. And the intention here is just to pop out the detail a little bit. So for example, on this combing around the observer's position, there's a nice little rivet detail and various fittings on it that will really respond well, I think, to a dry brushing this lighter colour. So as the lighter colour catches the edges of the detail, it just emphasises it a little bit, brings it a little bit more into relief. I'm really only going to bother doing this around the open areas of the cockpits. It'll be completely lost further back in the fuselage, so I'm not going to bother with that. I do this dry brushing step before the detail painting because if, for example, I painted this panel in its black colour and then did the grey-green dry brushing, you couldn't really avoid going over the black, which I don't want. So do it at this stage and then we'll do the detail painting next. Now, Airfix do provide some decals for instrumentation, so we might have to apply some gloss varnish to some of these parts before we apply those. But again, that's another reason to do the dry brushing at this stage. I like to put the gloss varnish over the top of the dry brush. You can do this step after matting a gloss coat down, but it's personal preference, I guess. I just prefer to do things in this order. Okay, that's a bit too subtle, so just some XF2 white added to the green, and that just hopefully should brighten things up a little bit. I'm just being cautious here because I don't want it to look as though it's snowed inside the cockpit. Now at this stage you could gloss all these parts and give it a coat of weathering wash, but I'm not sure that it'll add that much to the finished effect, so I'm not going to do that stage. So onto the detail painting now. Most of the detail painting is in black on the panels, but some of these have got decals on top, so I'm going to cut a stage out by just applying gloss black. I'll have to matte this down again afterwards. So I'm just using some Tamiya lacquer gloss black, which is LP1. Now the lacquer range from Tamiya brush paints fairly well, and I just thin it with lacquer thinners. It just helps it flow a little bit better as well. This is Citadel Abaddon Black, which I like to use for larger areas of brush painting. It flows really well, and the thing with it is that you can overpaint it, so you can put second coats on and it doesn't drag too much. Sometimes I think with Tamiya acrylic subsequent coats drag up the underlying paint, but it doesn't seem to do that with these Citadel colours. I was quite tempted to use the figures in the kit, For the first time in years, I think, Airfix have redesigned their pilot crew figures, and they're really quite nice. A lot more realistic than previously. The pilot with his hands in his lap has gone, but they are animated, it looks like, just for this kit. So the rear gunner, for example, has got alternative arms for the two different types of rear gun supplied in the kit. So they might need a bit of modification if you were going to save them and use them in a different model. I'm not sure that you're going to be able to see these, but I'll paint them anyway. Now don't quote me, but I think that the trim weights sitting in the tail of the aircraft, I'll just pick those out with a bit of Tamiya lacquer gunmetal. This is the light gunmetal. They do 2 in the lacquer range. Now, although Airfix provide an optional seat back with the belts moulded in, I'm going to use some Edward belts. I just think they look a bit better in this scale. Twist them round a little bit. I don't like them to just sit flat on the seat, look a bit unnatural, but just a few little twists like that with the tweezers just gives them a bit more of a fabric appearance. Get the instrument decals on now. They look really nice on the sheet. The decal sheet's made by Cartograph, so these should go on really nicely. There's quite a lot of raised detail on the panel, so it's going to take some setting solutions to get it to set down a bit. The key here is not to rush it. You've just got to let the microset and microsol do its job. Just got set on this at the moment, starting to go down. So I'm just going to leave that for 5 minutes now, just before I put any microsol on it. Okay, the microset's done its job, but I want it to settle down a little bit more, so on with some microsol. Again, leave it alone. So this is just some white PVA on this just aluminium kitchen foil, and I'm just going to apply the Airfix decal for the map onto that. So that just gives it something to back onto. Just putting the decal flat on the map table, I just don't think will look as convincing. All the decals have dried now, so I'll just give them a coat of flat varnish where I've got all the gloss black. So here are the parts that are separated earlier on in the build, and if you separate them carefully they go back together perfectly okay. Just a little bit of Tamiya brown panel liner, always looks nice on aluminium painted parts. These parts are alternative parts in the kit for the two versions that Airfix provide. One has a single Lewis gun, so I've got this separate panel here and a pair of ammunition boxes to fit onto that as well. The last part to fit in this step is the instrument panel, and I just want to touch in the instrument faces with some Tamiya LP9 gloss varnish. Okay, the cockpit's done at that stage. What I want to do now is just cut out the fuselage halves, paint the interior, and hopefully we'll be able to get this fitted before the end of the video. Before I paint the interior fuselage halves, I'll just do a check fit of the cockpit. That's all good, no problems there, all fits in nicely. The windows fit in from the outside here at the back, so I don't need to bother about those just yet. That's a really nice fit. I'll get the interior painted. Now the front section here is interior green, but the call out in the Airfix instructions for the rear part is in flesh, which seems a strange colour. I think it's meant to represent linen, so I'm just going to mix a pale shade of deck tan with a little bit of white in it and just spray that into the rear, mask it off, and then paint the interior green. Before we close the fuselage up, I've just got a couple of parts to fit on the interior. So they're some form of exhaust, I think. I'm not sure what exactly they are, but they need to go in at this stage. And the other little job is to drill a hole out for our version on the tail here. Okay, we can get this together, and I don't think we need to apply any cement. It should hold in place, particularly with this front bulkhead locking everything together. Okay, let's get this joined up. So that's gone together really nicely. The only tight spot really is here on this bulkhead where it has to squeeze into its slot next to those ducts that I fitted earlier on, but it does go in. So that's all taped up. I'll leave that now for at least a couple of days to dry before I attempt to sand the seams. They should clean up really nicely, and that's a really good start considering the amount of interior detail that Airfix have got, the number of parts in there. It's quite an achievement to be able to bring that fuselage together without any difficulties. It's really good engineering. So I'll leave it there, and hopefully we should be able to catch up fairly soon for the next part of the build. As I said at the beginning of the video, I think we'll only be 3 episodes doing this. So next time I want to carry on, get the airframe together, and then in the last episode painting, finishing, and the last bits of detail. Airfix have done a really nice job, and I'm really looking forward to getting this one finished off in the next couple of episodes. So until then, everybody, look after yourselves and enjoy your modelling. See you soon. Bye for now.